All right. Hello, Bio. Mrs. Cozen here, and we are in your second video in our ecosystem unit. Most of this is going to be in section 4-2 of your book when you guys get to some bookwork later on. The rest of chapter 4 is really about biomes and greenhouse effect and how climate can affect environments, which is that's content that's covered in earth science if you've already taken it in 8th grade, or it's going to be covered in earth science when you take it coming up. Okay, so we are in segment 2. It's going to be about chapter 4, succession or changes in ecosystems. I might not be able to fit this all into one video, but I'm going to do my best. So let's start with just talking about what are the different parts that shape an ecosystem. We have living and we have non-living parts here, okay? In this picture, you can see you have these two parts. You have what's called a biotic factor and an abiotic factor coming together. And when we put them all together, we get what's called an ecosystem. You guys already know what an ecosystem is. You guys know that the ecosystem is living and non-living parts, and then the community is the living parts, okay? So let's talk about examples of those different factors that can come together to shape an ecosystem. So first, biotic factors. Your prefix is bio. Bio means life. Biotic factors, anything living in an ecosystem. So another way to say this would be communities, all the populations that live together and compete within an ecosystem. I left the example blank because I would love for you guys to think some up. I'll give you a few that you should write down. Biotic factors would be plants, animals, bacteria, any kind of, prokaryotic or eukaryotic cells, anything living in an ecosystem. You guys can write down one. Please write down one of your own examples. Okay, think something that's living around you. And then abiotic are all the non-living influences. So think right now at where you're sitting. What are some of the non-living influences that are affecting your body? Okay, you're a biotic factor. What are some of the abiotic factors that you can feel right now? Okay, one of them, the chair that you're sitting on. Okay, the chair that you're sitting on is not living. I hope it's not. So we've got materials like minerals, rocks, soil. Most of those are abiotic factors. Now there are biotic factors that are living within our soil, but soil itself is an abiotic factor. We have temperature, anything associated with weather, precipitation, humidity. So think about the temperature you're feeling right now. All of those things are abiotic factors. And those two things put together help to shape an ecosystem, and changes in any one of those can shape an ecosystem as well. Okay. And then putting those two things together determines how living species survive and grow. You can have all the living species you want in a ecosystem, but if you don't have the abiotic factors to support them, then they're not going to survive. So think if we don't have the right water supply, if we don't have enough territory or space for large predators, if we don't have enough mates for them to reproduce, the abiotic factors really, really, really determine whether or not those biotic factors get to survive. So in this part of the unit, make sure you're thinking about living and non-living parts. Okay, so now let's talk about where and what our living things do. The first word you guys probably already know, habitat, is the place where an organism lives. Some organisms have more than one habitat if they migrate, say in the wintertime. Then a niche is the way that the organism lives or the role that it plays in that environment. I like to think of it as habitat is your address and niche is your job in the environment, okay? So if you guys think your habitat for most of the day is school, and your niche or your job is to be a student, to be a learner. Example, out in the wild here, I said a frog's habitat is a pond or a lake, and then their niche is that they're usually consuming bugs. You guys could think of any kind of predator. Think like a lion. Their habitat is the African savanna, and their niche or their job, depending on whether the male or the female, is to hunt. It's to hunt. They're eating the gazelles. They're eating the zebras. That's their job in the environment. And it's the job is fine as long as there's enough resources to fill the job and there aren't other living things competing with that job. All right, so here you guys is an example of a really specific way that 3 different breeds of bird are all living in a similar habitat, but they have different niches, so they're not in competition with each other. So you can see these are 3 species of warblers. They probably come from a common ancestor, and they all live in the same habitat. They all live in these large pine trees. But each one of them occupies and consumes different food from a different part of the pine tree. So this warbler is living right in the top of the pine tree. So his part of the habitat doesn't cross with this warbler, the one that's in the yellow. And then this last warbler is in purple. And you can see he's living in the bottom of the tree, he or she. So right now they're all sharing a similar habitat, but they have different niches. They're eating different parts of the tree. Some are consuming pine cones. Some are living off of bugs. So it's okay as long as they don't cross over into each other's parts of the habitat or into each other's niches. They can share that same habitat. Okay. Now let's talk about when living things interact with each other. This can be different species. This can be organisms within the same species. So remember, what's a community? All the populations living in one place. How communities or different species interact has a huge effect on ecosystems. You guys learned that in the first segment when we talked about when we have changes in a food web. When we change one population, it can affect other populations. And one of the parts that's affected by that are resources. Resources can be abiotic factors like water and territory and oxygen. They can also be biotic factors like food and mates. And when we don't have enough resources, when we start to run out of resources, we have what's called competition. And this is the thing that fuels that natural selection we talked about in evolution. Competition for resources, the best survives, not the strongest. So whoever gets those biotic and abiotic resources. Organisms of same or different species trying to use a resource or resources in the same place at the same time. So if you guys have ever heard of like an invasive species, which you probably have, we have lots of them here in Michigan. We're going to talk about them a lot in the next unit, in the next part of the unit, sorry, in segment 3. What you have is you have a new abiotic factor. You have a new species coming in and competing for resources that are already there. So that's why you start to see an effect on the current food web or food chain. All right, now we're going to talk about specific examples of interactions. The first one's predation. You guys probably know this one already. Predator. One organism eats another one. One benefits, one dies. Okay, example would be alligator consuming a bird, lion eating a gazelle. Okay, those are all examples of predation. Really great for one species, not so great for the other one. All right, now the next one, symbiosis. This is the overarching idea. You've got two species that live closely together, and we're going to talk about 3 different examples of that, okay? So if you guys can remember species, big overarching idea, and then we're going to have 3 examples. All right, the first one is called mutualism. Think of the word mutual. Mutual means that we have something going on for both species. They both benefit. Example that I had was bees and flowers. Bees get food from the flowers. They get pollen from the flowers, which they use to make honey. And then flowers get to spread their pollen and pollinate or reproduce with other flowers because it sticks to the bee and it moves to another area. So they both benefit from that relationship. Another example of mutualism would be clownfish and sea anemones. You guys remember from Nemo, when Nemo lives in the anemone. The clownfish gets protection from the anemone, and the anemone gets cleaned by the clownfish. So those are examples where they have a mutual relationship. They're both benefiting. The next one is called commensalism, where one species benefits and the other one kind of doesn't care. Example I gave you guys there was barnacles. If you guys have ever seen the side of a humpback whale, they've got all those kind of gray spots that look sort of like a rash. Those are actual living things called barnacles. The barnacles attach to the side of the humpback whale, sorry. They attach to the side of the humpback whale. They get to move and gather food from the open ocean, and the humpback whale isn't really affected by them at all. Next one is parasitism. I know that you guys know this one. It's a super gross one. One species is helped and another one is harmed. One example is ticks or fleas. They both draw blood from the species that they're living on, so they benefit and the other species is harmed. Another one is tapeworms, ones that live inside your digestive system. We can talk a little bit more about those in class. They are a parasite that lives off of the food and the resources that the other living thing is taking in. All right. Now let's talk about how ecosystems change. I'm about to run out of time here, guys. So I'm just going to introduce you to that. Anytime that you guys have a disturbance in an ecosystem, here's examples. The ecosystem will bounce back in a predictable way, and we're going to start talking about that next. That's called succession. So we're going to stop the video here.